Thank you for watching Murder, Monsters, and Mysteries. Tonight we take a look at a very interesting mystery. Do we live in a simulated reality? Many scientists and theorists now believe that we live in a artificially created reality, computer generated. We'll take a look at some of the best evidence for this. Stay till the end, as I've got an interesting point to make that I don't think many videos on this subject have thought about. It's from my personal experience. In 1989, I started performing with carnivals, circuses, parades, and private functions. I've traveled the country my entire life. I'm a magician, a fire breather, and the fastest balloon man in the world. This video has not been sped up. This really is how fast I am at making balloons. Now, what do these things have to do with a simulated reality? Stay till the end and you'll find out. The Mandela effect. Many people remember Nelson Mandela dying in the 1980s, though he actually lived until 2013. The Mandela effect is based upon a woman who remembered writing a paper, her college thesis, on the death of Mandela, then years later discovering that he was alive still, which was a shock to her. Her observation of this is what the Mandela effect was founded on. The Mandela effect is when people have supposedly false memories of things, where they remember things that supposedly never happened, but people remember them so clearly, almost as if they're from an intersecting reality, or they're holding on to a memory from a different version of our reality. Examples of the Mandela effect include in Star Wars, when Darth Vader says, "No, I am your father." Many people remember that as, "Luke, I am your father." In fact, James Earl Jones himself remembers the line as, "Luke, I am your father." So even the actor who said it remembers it incorrectly, or possibly correctly, but from another reality. Another strong example is a 1990s movie called Shazam, starring the comedian Sinbad. If you remember this movie, you're not alone. I remember it myself. I remember my little brother enjoying it. I remember the VHS case, and yet this movie does not exist. Missing aliens. We've been around for thousands of years, but in the more recent times, we've been keeping close track of our solar system. We've been scanning other planets for signs of life, for radio communication, for power surges. So why is it we haven't found aliens yet? Could it be that we are the only creatures in this simulated reality? With galaxies so big, you'd think we would have encountered alien life by now. Some people believe the reason we haven't encountered alien life must be because we are living in a simulated reality, and they didn't bother to make aliens. Some DNA contains a computer virus. In 2017, a group of researchers at the University of Washington proved that they could embed malicious computer code into physical strands of DNA. Their aim was to show that computers working in gene sequencing were vulnerable to attack, but they may also have inadvertently revealed what we perceive to be biological reality was in fact computer code all along. Climate change or other disasters. Climate change is a possible impending disaster, and we know that the world has been through other extinction level events and disasters in the past. If we live in a simulation, could it be that they're recreating events to try to figure out the best possible solution, protecting the species in reality? Maybe our simulation has been put on by us from the future in order to figure out what to do with our impending climate change disasters. Video games already right now look like real life. So if we can make video games look like real life now, how much better will they be in 100 years from now, or 1,000 years from now? So if humanity was living on this planet ahead of us, or if there were versions of us living ahead of us by 100 years, it only makes sense that they would have video games and artificial realities just as real as actual reality. Computer code issues. Theoretical physicist James Gates claims he has identified what appears to be actual computer code embedded in the equation of string theory that describe the fundamental particles of our universe. He says he found error-correcting codes. They're what make web browsers work. He claims that these computer codes are actually copywritten and invented by a person in the 70s. So Gates believes he knows where the code even came from in modern times, that was applied to our own reality in the future. Our universe's strict laws of physics might be a sign that we're living in a simulated reality. For example, the speed of light may be there to limit our reality. Speed of light being the limit that we can transmit information. The Goldilocks zone. Earth exists within what astrobiologists call a Goldilocks zone. Close enough to a star that greenhouse gases can trap heat to keep liquid water, but far enough away that the planet does not become a Venusian hothouse. The fact that we live in such a perfect position to allow life on planet Earth could be evidence for a simulation. Perhaps someone created the best possible, comfortable environment for our evolution. Ghosts could be proof that we live in a simulated reality. What if paranormal events were not hauntings or alien encounters, but glitches in the simulation? What if when someone sees a ghost walk across a room, it's not a ghost, but instead an echo of computer programming? The double-slit experiment is one of the strongest bits of evidence pointing towards an alternate reality or simulated reality. If you cut two slits in a sheet of metal and send light through them, first as a constant wave, then in individual particles, it seems simple, but what happens is anything but simple. In fact, it's what started science down the bizarre road of quantum mechanics. In the early 1800s, the majority of scientists believed that light was made up of particles, not waves. English scientist Thomas Young had a hunch that the particle theory wasn't the end of the story, and set out to prove that light was a wave. He knew that waves acted in predictable ways, and if he could demonstrate those interactions with light, he could prove that light was indeed a wave. So he set up an experiment. He cut two slits in a sheet of metal and shone light through them onto a screen. If light were made of particles, the particles that hit the sheet would bounce off, and those that passed through the slits would create the image of two slits on the screen, sort of like spraying paint on a stencil. But if light were a wave, it would do something very different. Once they passed through the slits, the light waves would spread out and interact with one another. Where the waves met crest to crest, they'd strengthen each other and leave a brighter spot on the screen. Where they met crest to trough, they would cancel each other out, leaving a dark spot on the screen. That would produce what's called an interference pattern of one very bright slit shape surrounded by echoes of gradually darker slit shapes on either side. That's what happened. Light traveled in waves. Simple, right? But it wasn't that simple. Around the 20th century, a few scientists began to refine this idea. Max Planck suggested that light and other types of radiation come in discrete amounts, quantized. And Albert Einstein proposed the idea of the photon, a quantum of light that behaves like a particle. As a result, he said that light was both a particle and a wave. So back to the double slit experiment. Remember, if light were a particle, it would create a sort of spray paint stencil pattern instead of an interference pattern. By using a special tool, you actually can send light particles through the slits one by one. But when scientists did this, something strange happened. The interference pattern still showed up. This suggests something very, very weird is going on. You would expect that if you were to send particles through one at a time, there wouldn't be an interference pattern because there's nothing to interfere with its flight. So seeing that it still had an interference pattern was disconcerting. The photons seemed to know where they would go if they were in a wave. It's as if a theater audience showed up without seat assignments, but each person still knew the exact seat to choose in order to fill the theater correctly. This means that all the possible paths of these particles can interfere with each other, even though only one of the possible paths actually happens. All realities exist at once, until the final result occurs. Stranger still, when scientists placed detectors at each slit to determine which slit each photon was passing through, the interference pattern disappeared. This suggests that the very act observing the photons collapse those many realities into one. So in essence, if you sent a single particle through on its own and didn't monitor it, it would behave as though it was interacting with waves. But if you sent a single particle through and watched it, it would behave as you would expect a single particle to. The entire outcome being dependent on whether the scientists were watching or not, using a monitoring device. This definitely makes us rethink the old saying of, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there, does it make a sound? According to this information, it might not. Maybe there is no forest unless we are there looking at it. In video games, the reality follows you around. If you're not in that section of the game, that section of the game does not exist, which makes you wonder if our reality is the same. If we're not actively observing a part of reality, it might cease to exist until we next observe it again. Crazy, right? It is for scientists too, which is why quantum mechanics is one of the most hotly debated areas of modern science. So what does my experience as a circus performer have to do with the simulated reality theory? Well, I'll tell you. As a magician, as a traveling performer, I've worked with tons of professional hypnotists. Hypnotism is a strange thing. I've known hypnotists who can put people through a rapid induction. This is hypnotism at an accelerated rate. They can shake the hand of a participant without having met them before and put them into a hypnotic trance. Once this person is in a hypnotic trance, they're able to give them suggestions that they will act out. How far can these suggestions make a person go? Well, in a recent study, they actually managed to program a hypnotism participant into a mock assassination attempt. Over a few hypnotic sessions, they programmed this individual to walk down a certain street, and when they saw a person that they recognized via photo that they had been shown, they walked over to a hidden gun, pulled it out, pointed it at their intended victim, and pulled the trigger. After pulling the trigger, this hypnotism participant woke up in shock and disbelief, finding a gun in their hand. And what does that have to do with the simulated reality theory? If we're in a simulated reality, like video game characters, what if the reason hypnotism works is because you can, to an extent, program characters in the reality? I know that might sound a little nutty, but if you know hypnotists like I know hypnotists, and you've watched them perform countless times, you would find it incredulous how easy it is for large groups of people to be immediately programmed on the spot to do things that they would never normally do, including murder. One hypnotist was known to rob banks. He would walk into a bank, hypnotize the teller, and they would give him as much money as he told them to. Another hypnotist recently was charged and arrested for sleeping with his patients, which we have no idea how many he managed to hypnotize into his sexual acts before he was caught, finally. Now, if this is a simulated reality, is it that hypnotism takes over a character's mind to an extent, reprogramming them? Or are we living in a world where a certain number of people are bots, artificial characters that you can take over? I tend to lean towards, if this is a simulated reality, some hypnotists are able to an extent, reprogram characters like you or me to do what they want. So if we are in a simulated reality, that would be a bit of a glitch in the system where you can reprogram it to an extent. Strange. Scary. Thank you for watching Murder, Monsters, and Mysteries. If you enjoyed tonight's video, please like and subscribe, as we'll be uploading more regularly.